This is the Graceful Atheist Podcast. Welcome to the Graceful Atheist Podcast. My name is David, and I am trying to be the Graceful Atheist. Well, we're roughly a month to a month and a half into quarantine and social distancing. I hope that is not being too much of a burden for you. I hope that you and yours are healthy and well. And if that is not the case, I weep with you, I cry with you, I grieve with you. Do continue to proactively reach out to people to let them know how much you care about them, to express the feelings that sometimes are not explicitly stated. Let this time be a prompt to connect with the people that you love the most. When Paul talks about faith, hope, and love, 2 out of 3 ain't bad. This whole podcast is about secular grace, about love. For a moment, I want to talk about hope. Hope is a very good thing, particularly in a difficult time like now. Hope acknowledges the reality, and hope acknowledges that we don't have control, but it changes us in a way that makes us capable of overcoming the difficulties and potential tragedy. So the secular grace thought of the week is live in hope. I want to celebrate with you a bit of a milestone, my first financial supporter. I want to give a shout out to Joel W. and thank you so much for contributing. I don't often ask for donations. I want to make it super clear that me as an individual, I don't need those in any way. But if you have truly expendable money that you would like to donate, I can guarantee you that everything that is contributed will be put back into the podcast. It'll go into equipment. It will go into services to improve the podcast. On that note, I just want to remind people that I'm actually far more interested in having people participate. Again, if you have particularly audio engineering skills, I'd very much like to hear from you. That would be a much appreciated contribution. For those of you who can't contribute, please rate and review the podcast. I know it's silly and I ask all the time, but it has a huge impact on the number of people who see the podcast. Please consider doing so. On to today's show. My guest this week is David Johnson. David is the co-host and creator of the podcast and blog Skeptics and Seekers. He is the skeptic side or the atheist side of that equation. It is a podcast that has both the atheist and the believer Christian perspectives, and they alternate back and forth every episode. David has featured on Justin Brierley's Unbelievable podcast at least twice. As recently as Easter Sunday's episode of Unbelievable, David was on defending the rationality of doubting the resurrection. I highly recommend that you take a look at that. I will have links in the show notes for all of David's work and his appearances on the Unbelievable podcast. David is a former Church of Christ member. He is a pastor's kid. He was a worship leader and a minister. He says he was baptized at 7. He was leading his church in song at 7. He was preaching at 12. He was a youth leader at 15 and an assistant minister at 21 until he began to have doubts. And in his words, the little things were the big things. That started him down the road of questions, doubt, and ultimately deconversion. Here's my conversation with David Johnson. David, welcome to the Graceful Atheist Podcast.
Hi.
Hey, David, so you are the podcast host of the Skeptics and Seekers podcast and a blog of the same name. Can you give us just the quick overview of who you are and the work that you're doing?
So on my show, what I would say is tell the audience a little bit about who you are and why the heck we should care.
Yeah.
Something like that. We're a little different, you and I. You're very nice. You're such a nice man.
Not in real life. Not real life. It's all a facade.
So, I'm David. And Skeptics and Seekers, it was I guess it was a brain fart about 2 years ago. I was thinking about the Unbelievable show. I think, appearing on it around that time. Maybe, was it 2 years ago that happened, or was it 3? But I was about to go on that show for the first time, and it was a few months after Justin's book came out, and we did. Andrew and I got together and put together a team, and we did a response book called Still Unbelievable, which can be found and read for free on reasonpress.net.
And I'll have links in the show notes as well.
So I was thinking about ways to capitalize on that experience, because it's not every day that you are a guest on maybe the largest show of its kind in the world.
Yes, that's got a huge audience.
Right.
Justin Brierley's podcast, Unbelievable, huge audience.
Right. I mean, what show has a bigger audience? 700 Club? Still doing that? I mean, that sane people would think of as a Christian program. I can't think of it. And so the opportunity to be on that was just fantastic. Justin, a very gracious host. The time on the show goes very fast.
I can imagine. And
the interlocutor that day was the dreaded Randall Rouser. In fact, we were thinking to ourselves, who could Justin spring on us? Because we didn't know who he was going to get. Right. We didn't know until the last minute. We were just, I had this short list of people that I didn't want to talk to. Randall Rouser was at the top of my short list.
Okay. It's interesting. Let me pause there for a second, because I find it interesting. We're talking about the world here of apologetics and counter-apologetics. And there is a part of the counter-apologetics world that really lifts Randall up on a pedestal because he's a nice guy, because he generally will give I was about to say the benefit of the doubt, but I think that's not accurate. More so, he will steel man a person's argument. He's not out for the gotcha questions. But at the same time, I find him to be just as disingenuous as most other apologists. So I find it odd that sometimes he's put on this pedestal.
Yes, it is odd. And so I'm going to make it even weirder by saying I really have grown to like Randall Rouser since our melee in the ring. I kind of hated him. He and we've had some really rough scrapes online. And then that conversation was awful. It certainly felt that way to me. But you know what? We did get to know each other a bit. After that show, of course, we're thinking about ways that we could capitalize on it. And I was thinking through some of the ideas that I've had, some of the things that I wanted to do. And I liked Justin's show a lot. I thought it was a good model. I've been listening to Unbelievable and following the blog for many years. And I thought that there was one thing that I could do, or that could be done, to improve upon the show. And I decided to try to do it myself. Justin's show, despite the fact that he tries to bring Christians and atheists together in dialogue, it's still a Christian show.
Right.
Justin is the sole host. Justin is a Christian. It's a Christian show. And it will often feel like his thumb is on the scale a bit. And I know that he tries hard to keep that from happening, but it's still a Christian show, if you hear what I mean.
Yes. And I agree.
Yeah. So I wanted a show that wasn't a Christian show or an atheist show.
Okay.
I wanted a show that brought in that dialogue, but where there were two hosts rather than one host, and both hosts would have equal say. It wouldn't just be my show and then a cardboard cutout Christian who has to answer, my challenges every week.
Right.
1 week I would propose the topic. The next week he would propose the topic. So I would have to handle his challenges every other week. We both wrote blogs, and each blog had a write-up from me and a write-up from the Christian host, and it's linear. So whoever's week it was, that person's blog post came first and the second person's response came after that. So it was equal in all the respects that I could make such a show. And that's what I wanted to do. And I was hoping to attract more Christian commenters and have even better conversations. And I thought that was an element that was missing from Justin's show. And I thought, well, why not? Why not me? So I tried it. That's the genesis of Skeptics and Seekers.
So we've answered the question of why people should care. And I think we're going to come back to your secular work a little bit later in the show. I want to start with, as this podcast, the Graceful Atheist podcast, tends to be about the experience of deconversion. And what's really important about that is it's not the same as maybe our secular friends who have been atheists all their lives. You have the term exgens that describes us, and that is having had a life-altering faith for some period of time, probably into adulthood, past that, I'm just a teenager and I'm rebelling, but into adulthood, and then subsequently determining that you can no longer believe. So I want to hear your story from kind of the beginning. So I understand that you grew up as a pastor's kid. Let's start there. What was that like?
Let's see, being a preacher's kid, it's a lot like being someone else's kid, except harder. And I think it is. I think it probably is harder. Now, let me just say before I say anything about my childhood, my mother and my father, the ones that gave birth to my oldest brother, are still the parents I have today. So this is a rare thing. They are both still alive, and they have only ever been married to each other. So right. Mine is not the product of a broken home or anything like that. I had a very, as far as values goes, fairly traditional upbringing. Now, that said, what differentiates a preacher's kid from just some kid in school is the responsibility. Because from a very early age, you were carrying your family's reputation on your shoulders. And it doesn't have to be explicitly said. You know this to be true. And sometimes it is explicitly said. But you are not free to be just a kid. There are some mistakes you can't make.
Right.
Because you're not just a church person's kid. Everybody was a church person's kid. You're a preacher's kid. And family is very important. And when it comes to church leadership, my father was a church leader. You had to have believing children. There's this little clause in the Bible that talks about believing children. Mm-hmm. We interpret those things very strictly in our particular denomination in particular. And so it's very hard to be a church leader and have kids that didn't toe the line.
Right.
So I would say that that's the first thing. There's just a tremendous responsibility, because from your earliest age, you can really impact your family by acting out or doing something bad. And they believed in corporal punishment. Okay. Where you beat the kid half to death.
Yeah.
I think some of that is fear that if you don't punish your child thoroughly enough, they're going to do something to destroy you. And, some of it may be, when I think about it, they did this thing and they've embarrassed me and now I'm really mad. And corporal punishment is a way that they can take it out on you a bit.
Yeah.
So there was always that sense of extra responsibility for who you were and who your father was, and you've got to stay in line, and it makes social life very difficult. I think that I was going to always be socially awkward, mm-hmm. but I was doubly socially awkward because of all of the things going against me as an individual and socially. I also had to be holier than thou. I mean, I literally had to be holier than them.
Right.
I couldn't be like them. I had to be apart from the world, not among the world, and there had to be a clear distinction in my life choices and their life choices. And I'm thinking about these things at age 7.
Right. Wow.
Right. So this is not, you might think I'm talking about my teen years, 15, 16 years. No, heck no. I was preaching by then.
Right.
I'm talking about pre-10, right?
Yeah.
Single digit years. So I have always been a little weird, and I've learned to embrace that, but it was hard.
My experience was pretty radically different. I came to Christianity in my teen years. By the time I got to church, I was 18 or 19 years old. And one of my observations, one of the things that I thought was very interesting was how hard it was on the pastor's kids at my church. And I thought, wow, man, these guys, they were teenagers at the time, and they can't just make regular mistakes. They can't be a regular teenager. And I just always felt like that must be super challenging. I went on to Bible college where I met many, many people who were pastors' kids, and they described very similar things to what you're describing. I know we're poking fun at it a bit, but it's very serious. The corporal punishment point of view, lots of people have residual trauma after experiencing that as a kid and growing up and realizing it has impacted them even into their adulthood. So I just wanted to acknowledge that.
Yeah. Can I say one more thing about being a PK?
Sure, absolutely, please.
The secrets.
Okay.
So this is something you wouldn't know unless you were a preacher's kid. And you may have known preacher's kids, but they wouldn't tell you this.
Right.
There are secrets. There's a burden of secrecy from a very young age, because what preachers' families are? They're human.
Right.
They are just like everyone else's families. They have the same drives and the same judgments and the same everything. We're not a different kind of person.
Right.
And we do screw up. It's just that we don't have the catharsis of letting that out. There is a certain catharsis and healing in, screwing up, getting caught, being censured by your society, and then getting on with it. Right.
Yeah.
There's a process there, when a kid is caught doing drugs, it's like, oh, and then everybody's talking, and then it's embarrassing.
Yeah.
And then there's the beatings, and then there's the lectures. But you know what? You go back to school.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? And you get it over. Well, okay, that happened.
Right.
That doesn't happen in the preacher family. You can't do that. We don't get a chance to do that. What we have are secrets, deep secrets. We know what our mom is like. We know what our dad is like in particular, the guy that everybody respects. We know who he is.
As a human being,
we know who our brothers are. We know who's, let me put it this way. I carry family secrets.
Yeah.
That are not mine. I carry family secrets about members of my family to this day. And I find it burdensome. I find it hard to not talk about sometimes, but even to this day, I have to worry about the family's honor, their goddamned honor. And I never ask for that burden. I don't want the burden, but it's there. And so I can assure you, with every preacher's kid, they're carrying around some secrets that they don't want.
Wow, that sounds brutal. The one point of contact that I do have with that is I grew up in a drug and alcohol addicted family, and that secrets thing speaks to me, right? Like, I think part of getting whole, becoming healthy, is unloading the truth. I think we read this somewhere, the truth will set you free, and being able to just express that is cathartic, like you say. I do want to segue here. I think that was profound. What I want to hear from you, David, is what your faith was like, and you can pick any point in time in your life to describe that. One of the things that you and I know that believers who might be listening to this will have a question about is, were you really a Christian? Were you really a born again Christian? Can you address that?
Well, I would say that if I wasn't really a Christian, there are no real Christians. I can't think of people in my life who are more real Christians than me, and I know my parents.
Right.
I mean, which is not to cast aspersions on their faith, but I'm just saying if what we're talking about is 100% conviction, I was 110.
Right.
Paul boasts about being a Pharisee of Pharisees. I was a Christian of Christians.
Right.
I would also say to those who say, well, you couldn't have been a real Christian because you left. Well, Paul was a real Pharisee, and he was able to say, I count it as dung.
Right.
So I would just offer that your Bible would beg to differ. It is possible to be perfectly convicted in something and then change your mind later. I was that. I would say that I was more convicted as a Christian than I am as an atheist. I'm not a convicted atheist. Right. a God could walk up to me and tap me on the shoulder, and I would say, "Oh, yeah, okay, I was wrong about that."
Yeah.
I would not mind that encounter. So people might think that I am committed to atheism or something like that, or that I just want to be an atheist. No, I'd be happy to find out that there were, a God or even a whole pantheon of gods. I'd love to find out what's going on in that world. So that's good writing for me. So I would love that story. But when it came to Christianity, that was my life and my identity. And so I'll just give you a brief history of it to the extent that I can be brief here, to give you a flavor of it. I was baptized when I was 7. This was not uncommon where I came from.
Right.
So I was born in the Bible Belt in Alabama. Look it up, people from places other than the U.S. So it didn't get more Bible-y, more fundamentalist Bible-y than where I came from. Now, people in Tennessee and Mississippi and Georgia might argue with that, but they're wrong.
Okay. Okay. Duly noted.
This is kind of how I began life. And then at 7, I'd been hearing sermons all of my life, and I was always a clever kid, very, very smart, reading very early, access to books. And so that was a part of it. I had good genes, and all of that was very encouraged for me. So I'm also not overburdened with modesty. And so I can say that for my age at that time, I was probably close to brilliant.
I don't doubt it.
And so were my other brothers. By the way, we were exceptional kids. And anybody who knew us at that time would actually agree.
Yeah.
So this is not something that I'm just inventing here. It's almost embarrassing, because when you realize how exceptional we were as kids, we have a lot of explaining to do, because we've done crap with our life and with our potential.
Okay.
But Lord knows we had it. So at any rate, the reason I was baptized is because at some point it just sunk into me that I was not baptized. And I knew that you needed to be baptized, and that God was real, and I was praying to God every night, but I wasn't baptized. I also knew that hell was real, and if I died without being baptized, I was going to burn in hell for all my 7-year-old sins.
Yes, the terrible things you've done.
They were terrible in my mind, of course. And I was very aware of death. I knew of young people who had died. And, there was, the prayer that we teach kids to say, and if I die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. At some point it hit me, wait a minute, if I die before I wake, I want to burn in hell.
Oh my goodness.
That's a bad state of affairs. Now, what did I know and didn't I know? Well, I knew there was a God. I knew there was a hell. I knew the plan of salvation as our church understood it. I knew pretty much all of our church doctrines as far as that goes. And so, if you talk about knowing the tenets of the historic Christian faith, I'd say that I knew that. And yet I wasn't baptized.
Okay.
And so when that reality took full flower in my mind, I rushed to my father and I insisted I need to be baptized.
Yeah.
And then we had a talk. And of course, I said all the right things. I knew what to say. I was a preacher's kid, for Pete's sake.
Yeah.
And so Tuesday night, we had a Tuesday night Bible class at a neighbor's house, because my father was always doing Bible classes and things.
Mm-hmm.
And I stripped down to my underwear in front of a gathering in the bathtub and was baptized there. And then I led the closing song. And I have been a worship leader from that night forward.
Wow.
Well, I was also exceptionally talented in singing. I was a musician for a while.
Okay.
I was the singer of the family in a family of people who were very talented.
Right.
So it became very natural that I became the singer, or one of the singers in the church. That was among my first church jobs. As I grew, age 12, I took the pulpit for the first time to preach, and
Wow.
I did that fairly regularly. From that point on, by the time I was 15, I was leading a youth group. By the time I was 21, I was assistant minister.
Okay.
This was my life. I was the heir apparent. I was set to take over the ministry at a church that I had attended as a child. And now I was the assistant minister there, and the preacher who had been there when I was a child, he was still there. And so he was kind of my quote unquote mentor. But I mean, he was a mentor who, I don't want to say didn't know his Bible well, but I knew mine better.
Right.
And it was one of the things that was very hard for me to do, was pretend to be mentored by people who didn't know half as much as I did. So,
okay, that rings familiar. I get what you're saying.
Well, I mean, it was tough.
Yes.
But, a young person in the church being groomed to be the next full preacher at a congregation, and my path was pretty well set.
Yeah.
This was going to be my life, but things happened along the way. And so I guess, you'll probably want to talk about my descent into hell.
Yeah, yes. Right before we get there, so that I think the point that I want to just drive home as explicitly as possible, that anyone that knew you at that time, not only would they have known that you were one of the most dedicated Christians they knew, but they would have looked up to you for that mentoring, for that wisdom.
Absolutely. And my life at that time, let's say, the early to mid 20s, my life up to that time, with the exception of maybe one or two secret things,
okay,
was exemplary.
Right.
And so it was proper. I know how strange this sounds for us to say, but it was proper for people to look at me, up to me at that time.
Right.
I was the real deal. I lived what I taught.
Yeah.
And I studied very hard. I took nothing for granted. I stood on the shoulders of giants. And even though I didn't go to seminary for preaching, I was around it forever. And I had all of my father's college materials. I had later on my mother's college materials. She went on to become a PhD. I had access to the professors. There was a Christian college for our denomination in the town. My family was a big deal. So I had access to anyone
Right.
I wanted to have access to. And my favorite things to do when I saved up money, it wasn't to buy toys. It was to go to the Baptist bookstore. I wasn't a Baptist. Baptists were kind of our enemies, but they had a hell of a bookstore. And so I saved up my money. And for me, a trip to the mall was what other kids would think of as a trip to the mall or a nice day out having fun or to the fair. For me, would be a trip to the Baptist bookstore.
Oh, that is an awesome story.
I was a kid who brought a briefcase to school for a while, and it always had my Bible, a couple of commentaries. Yes, none ironically.
Just in case you had a theological emergency.
Absolutely. This was now I was forever losing my school books, but you're not gonna. I'm never gonna lose my Thayers. Was I the real thing? Pathologically so.
Okay. So I think we've established that really well. And obviously you wouldn't be on the show if there wasn't more to the story. So what were the first cracks? What were the things that pushed you to start asking questions?
So I want to acknowledge that every time someone asks me this question, I try to answer it. But I recognize that the answer is different every time.
Yeah.
It's not the same answer. So if you go back and just do a supercuts of every time I've answered this question in public, you could come up with a different answer every time and say, he's not telling the truth. Well, I am telling the truth.
Yeah.
But it's also an impossible question to ask, to answer. And it's the same question as, well, what was the thing that finally did it for you? The last straw. I don't know what the first straw is, and I don't know what the last straw is, people, okay? Because here's the thing, you don't recognize it when it's happening.
At the time, yes.
Right. It's only when you're looking back, and by the time you look back, there are lots of things that have happened, and you can't really place them chronologically.
Caveat noted. I agree. I completely understand what you mean. I feel like my story changes fairly often as well. And it's because I'll highlight one particular aspect or another in whatever mood that I am when I'm telling the story. So I get that.
Yeah, kind of like the Gospels.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly. Acknowledging that we're always doing post hoc rationalization.
Yeah.
What do you think now were some of the things?
So I can tell you in rough, I think it's the little things, the doctrinal distinctives that come before the big things like, is there a God?
Right.
But that said, in my denomination, the little things were the big things.
Okay.
So we did what some people called majoring in the minors. So there were no minor issues for us.
Right.
A minor issue was enough to split a church, was enough to break fellowship over. So, you can talk about the fundamentals of the historic Christian faith. We don't need to get anywhere close to the fundamentals of the historic Christian faith before you get to a problem. All right. So,
well, and to be fair to you and your former church, we have thousands of denominations. So
yes,
that seems to be a common problem.
we didn't invent that, but we mastered it.
Okay.
So let me give you some of the things that we believed. And I can tell you that it was some of those things that I started to question.
Okay.
So women had a subordinate role to men. So women's roles was an issue. Instrumental music. We did not believe in worshiping with instrumental music. Acts of worship, the things that you did. The number of times you went to church, church attendance. We even found a way to make that weird. The contribution, things like that. We did not believe in denominations and did not think of ourselves as a denomination. We were the one true church that Jesus established.
Absolutely.
Everyone else was a denomination, which is a sort of mental illness all in and of itself, if you think about that too long. And as a result of that, everyone except our denomination was going to burn in hell.
But of course.
Right. These were a few things, church leadership. So the first cracks in the armor came, I want to say it was the role of women. I would like to think that that's where my awakening began. It may not have, but I would really like to think that of myself.
Okay. It's blatant and terrible as soon as you look at it at all on any level.
Yes, but not where I came from.
Right.
Not where I came from. Where I came from, most people believed like I did. So this was one of these things where it was kind of a shared madness. You know, my denomination was very different than most of the other denominations. But in this, we shared this particular madness, a lot of it anyway. So we were far from the only people who didn't believe, for instance, that women could preach. I mean, we didn't believe that women could do anything. So at some point, you know, as I'm studying this, I'm starting to think that doesn't seem right.
Yeah.
And I have to say, I'm actually pretty sure that wasn't the first thing. I think the first thing was instrumental music. So I was a musician. Mm-hmm. I think I mentioned that. I had a lot of musical ability and also some training, and I was pretty good when I was a kid. So the way we sang, we had what we call song leaders. A song leader would stand in front of the congregation, tell them what they were about to sing, direct them to the right place in the hymnal, and begin the singing. And that person was the head singer / conductor of the congregational singing. It was often bad because not all churches had skilled musicians who could read music and carry a tune. So I was a bit of a peach right off the top because I could read music and carry a tune at a very young age. So, but I could also play the piano. And so this is a problem. It's not because I wanted to play the piano in church. Don't get me wrong; that would send me to hell. But by the way, this is what you need to understand. All of these things that I've mentioned that seem like silly denominational distinctives would send you to hell if you got it wrong.
Right.
So that's why I said, you know, we don't need to worry about the foundations of the Christian faith here. Any doctrine that someone got wrong was serious enough for hell and disfellowship.
Right.
And so all of these things were equally as important as the crucifixion. I am blown away by Christians today who take such a cavalier attitude and say, well, you know, I don't know. I don't know any of that. I don't care about any of that. The only thing that you have to know is that Jesus died for your sins and that he's forgiven you of your sins. You know, that the whole Jesus thing. Jesus is all you need to know.
The mere Christianity.
Mere Christianity. Are you kidding me? What the heck are you talking about? We don't.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
No, that's just the opening stakes. So I can't even relate to that today. I try. I do badly at it. Anyway, so I would often hear, you know, and I had friends who had play Christian music, and it wasn't a cappella, you know, and my favorite groups were always a cappella groups because that's what we sang, a cappella. And so it was kind of a matter of, well, is it okay for me to buy this praise tape from a popular group?
Yeah.
Like, you know, is it okay to listen to Amy Grant because she's got this musical accompaniment behind her? Well, okay, maybe if I can listen to it, is it okay to sing along with it? Because if I do, then I would be singing with musical instrumental accompaniment behind me. Well, if I did that, is it okay to do that if I wasn't worshiping God when I did it? It's just, you know, I'm singing and playing this Christian song, but it's not worship.
Yeah.
You know, it's these contortions that you have to go through. And at a fairly early age, I went through some of these contortions.
Right.
And it caused me to go back and look and see what the Bible really said. You know, I knew what our proof texts were. I can give you the proof text and all that. You don't need it. I went through, though, and I thought, you know what? That doesn't really seem to carry the weight that we're putting on it.
Right.
And I started doing some deep dives into worship in the Bible and music. And I read a lot of history, went back to Zwingli and forward from there, the Anabaptists and Lutherans and anyway, it's the stuff that an average 10-year-old would read. So I did that and I realized, you know, I think we might be wrong about that.
Yeah.
And that was really hard for me It was hard in a way that I am not going to be able to express to the listeners, because the listeners just hears this as crazy talk. But for me, if we were wrong about musical instruments, we were wrong about everything. Who am I if we're wrong about it? You don't understand how important this was. And then I think the women's roles came right after that, because I started examining if we can be wrong about this, what else could we be wrong about?
Yeah.
That is a Pandora's box.
Absolutely.
You cannot close it once you open it.
Yeah.
I came to the conclusion, after reading several books from writers from our denomination and other denominations, that we were way wrong about women too. Mm-hmm. And at that point, you're a member of the Church of Christ, and you're wrong about instruments, and you're wrong about the role of women. You're not the Church of Christ anymore. The Church of Christ is not the right church. And if the Church of Christ is not the right church, and that was the only church, there's no church. Right. So now, that wasn't the end of my journey, you understand, but that's the kind of crisis of faith I came to. It had nothing to do with whether there was a God or not.
I mean, I think Pandora's box is the best analogy, right? Like, as soon as you ask the question, if we're wrong about this, what else could possibly be wrong? You're not even at the point of you're not a skeptic yet even, right? You're still in 100%. You're just thinking,
still in.
Yeah, I just want to know what the truth is.
Terribly shaken at that point, though. I could tell you that, because it's like, who can I trust? Who can I trust with this? I was eating lunch with area preachers. Preachers would invite me to the congregations. Me and my brothers were traveling the state, preaching to congregations and doing seminars and stuff like that. Who do I trust to say, hey, look, can we talk?
Right.
I've discovered some things. And so I actually tried that once or twice. That was a mistake.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
Oh, man.
You don't want to do that. This is how the descent to hell began.
I really feel you on the, I have got questions that I know I can't ask anyone because the reaction is going to be so negative and so over the top. I think that's very, very common. But let's continue with, what was the end like for you, and what was the transition process of realizing that you no longer believed?
I'll let you know when I fully transition.
Yeah.
The end, it felt like death. A bad death, the kind with cancer, but not the cancer that takes you all at once. The kind that leaves you messed up for the next 10 years. And you spend the last 2 years in a hospital in pain. It's that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's the ugly kind of death. That's what it felt like. It was so hard for me just to say, not out loud, mind you, but in my own mind, I don't think I believe there's a God. I didn't even know how to formulate the thought. And then to say it out loud when you're sure that there's no one else in the woods to hear you.
Yes.
It's such a profound change when you have lived your entire life as one thing and you wake up and find that you're another thing.
Yeah.
So I don't know. What would it be like if China pursued world domination and conquered America, and you found yourself in a country that was now ruled by China? And you're not an American anymore. You can think you are in your heart, but it's just not true anymore. And the life you knew doesn't exist anymore. How would you feel about that? That's what it felt like at the end.
What you accept as reality has changed.
Yeah. Yeah. No, the world looks very different. I mean, just to give a couple of examples, because this is not just a question of theology. It is, in fact, how you live your life and how you think about, how you understand the world. Before, when I was a Christian, I was a very conservative Republican. I don't mean to get political.
Sure.
And after, I had to re-examine that because I had to re-examine everything.
Yeah.
Before I was homophobic. I think that would be the best way to describe it. And I was right along with God hates fags. I would have been that guy. Had Westboro Baptist Church known me at that time, I could have put him on the map a lot earlier. So,
okay.
And afterward, I had to think, well, what do I think about homosexuality? Because everything that I thought about homosexuality was based on my religion.
Right.
It was based on what God thought about homosexuality. But if there's no God who thought anything about homosexuality, well, now you've got to rethink that.
Yes.
On what basis do you rethink it?
Yeah.
How do you decipher what that even means now? You're 40 years old. The only thing you've ever known about homosexuality is that God finds it abominable. Now what?
Right.
You have to re-examine everything like that. What did I think about abortion? Well, what I thought about abortion was that, God. And now without God, what do I think about it? Well, I got to study it. I got to start from square one.
Yeah.
A simple matter of how old is the universe? Well, it's somewhere between 6,000 and 10,000 years. But wait a minute, God just died. Now how old is the universe?
Yeah.
Everything I knew about the world got blasted back into the Stone Ages. I really had to start over with a lot of basic things. Before, my wife was supposed to be submissive to me because I was the head of the house, just as Christ was the head of the church. Now what?
Right.
Now what? You see, everything has to be re-examined. Nobody wants to do that. I can tell you right now, nobody is ready to do it.
Right.
You may think you're ready to do it. You are not ready to do it.
Yeah.
It's terrible.
I've described deconversion as actually the deepest form of repentance, to kind of use a religious word, in that it's coming to the realization that I was wrong. I was wrong about fundamental things about the world and people. That can be very traumatic.
Absolutely. And when you say wrong about people, there's an aspect of this, my enemies are God's enemies.
Mm-hmm.
But what happens when there's no God? Now, who are your enemies? Do you have any enemies? All the people that you thought were beneath you, now who are they?
Right.
I can show you that one of the fairly immediate effects of admitting to myself that I no longer believed in a God was that I no longer treated any person or people groups as if they were someone to be held at arm's length. These were now my people. These are just people.
Human beings.
They go to the bar. They might have too much to drink. They have one-night stands. They yell at their kids when they get frustrated and then feel bad about it later. They are just people. And I don't have a mandate to hate these people anymore.
Right.
Or even to think of them as those people as opposed to me.
Right.
I had built my foundation as being separate and apart from the world. A people called out from the world is how the writer of First Peter put it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm no longer a person called out from the world. And I have to get to know the world again. Love not the world, neither the things that are in the world. The lust of the eyes, lust of the flesh, the pride of life. These things are not of the Father, but of the world. Mm-hmm. This is John. And all of a sudden, there's this world. What am I supposed to think about? Should I embrace it now?
Right.
And how do I do that? I spent a lifetime of not drinking and doing drugs. Guess what? I still don't drink and do drugs. I think that's one of the great things from my indoctrination.
Yeah.
I don't drink. I can show you, not because of any particular religious view. I just don't like alcohol. So it's not like I haven't tried it.
Yeah, it just so happens that I don't either. And I always feel like the odd person out, not for religious reasons, but for family history reasons.
Right. But it started as religious reasons. It's really hard to separate those out. I'm not a drug user because I've got a fairly sharp mind sometimes. and it's already suffering damage from just age.
Yes.
And so I don't need to help it along by doing drugs. It's my only marketable asset right now. It's really a whole, just figuring out who you are again in relation to the world. It's going back to school in a manner of speaking, and figuring out what the truth is about the world and people and humanity. And I'm still on that journey.
Right.
I am still trying to figure all that out.
Really quick, the last topic that I did want to just talk about is, and this is for me to be honest with you, I have at times been harsh on what I have called the debate culture. And just to give you some context, 2015, I go through a deconversion process. Of course, the first things that I'm looking at are the very debate-oriented speakers, writers, podcasts, YouTube, that kind of thing. And I really felt like a couple of months in, and I was just kind of done with that. I continued to be masochistic and occasionally listen to things like Unbelievable podcasts where really I would just be yelling at my phone. Like and I've said a number of times, my frustration is typically not with the average believer, it is with the apologist. And to just try to wrap this up and get to the question, it's that I feel that everything that can be said about the existing apologetics has been said by people smarter than me and more educated and more articulate. And I just felt like I couldn't really add to that conversation. And so what I'm trying to do with this show is more about the human side of things, like the experience of deconversion. So I wanted to acknowledge that because the Skeptics and Seekers podcast really is about the debate. And I wanted to give you an opportunity just to talk about, you use the term polemics. What does that mean to you? Why is that something that you find useful? And do you think it reaches believers?
So you've asked a good question. Can I answer the question that I think that you really want to ask?
Sure.
I think what you really want to ask is there room for the more acerbic type of communication? Is there room for it really?
Sure.
Does it really do any good, or does it just do harm? Or if I can put your question in a more SNS kind of way, why are you such an ass? So let me just answer that question, because I think that is a most important question to deal with. I would love to be the good guy, but I've been the good guy all of my life, right? So I know what that looks like and feels like, and I know ultimately where that ends up. And whereas I don't necessarily want to be the black hat mustache twirling bad guy either.
Yeah.
I do want to be the no nonsense guy who gets straight to the point. I don't care whether I'm popular with either side. Some things need to be said, and we don't have time to pussyfoot around.
Yeah.
And I think that is where we are in this world right now. And so I wish that all podcasts could be like your podcast. But I think if all podcasts were like your podcast, we would lose the war.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that in a harsh way. Before you can make the peace, you have to win the war. And you know who wins wars? Soldiers. Warriors win wars. And warriors aren't nice guys, right? I mean, they might,
sure,
they may have been nice before they were hardened into, soulless killing machines. And they might be nice to you, if you want to have a drink with them. But soldiers are made to kill people and break things. And we recognize all around the world that we don't want all of our citizens to be like that, but we need some of our citizens to be like that. If we don't have citizens like that, we lose. We lose economically. We lose. We lose. We don't maintain as an entity. And I think that right now we are in a culture war. And yes, we are going to need mediators and moderators, but we also need soldiers. And I've determined that it's my turn to take up that soldier mantle. And I've been doing it for a little while now, not long enough, but at some point I'll set it down and maybe try to be a peacemaker. But, George Washington was a killer before he was a president. Okay. And so we don't have America without killers. So I think the first part of the question is just a little bit naive. It almost assumes or opines the fact that we have people who are hard-bitten killers in this war. And if we didn't have hard-bitten killers in this war, you wouldn't have the right to do your podcast right now.
I feel defensive, so let me defend myself for just a second.
I would like to bring the hard-bitten killer out in you.
Yeah, and first of all, thank you for having me on your podcast. I tend to be much more counter-apologetic when I'm on other podcasts, so it's not that it's not there. It's just barely kept under wraps most of the time. And I want to just be totally honest and say people like yourself and others that I interview are very kind and say that I am gracious. That is, the truth be told, it really is a facade, right? I'm trying to do this. This is a thing that I do as an act of will, not necessarily because that's always how I feel, right?
Sure.
And even the moniker Graceful Atheist has atheists in it. I kept that. I could have said graceful humanists, right? I think it's very important that we normalize atheism, that we normalize these things. And sometimes that requires publicly debating and arguing and making very strong points. So I'm not saying that that's not necessary in any way. And again, from a personality point of view, we're all going to have a different angle that we hit, and maybe the doubter out there will hear you better than they hear me, or vice versa. And so I think it's great that we have the spectrum that we do. Yeah,
I do too. Everybody can't be like me, right? I don't want everybody on this side to be like me. I've taken it upon myself to be this way. Partly it's my personality, it's my upbringing, it's what I was when I was on the other side, right? So I don't see any reason to be something different now. I just have a different message. But I was on the front lines of the war before. So I'm still on the front lines of the war. I'm just facing the other direction.
Yeah. Yes.
So I can assure you that Christians who are also on the front lines of the war, they're assholes too.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
They are hard-bitten killers too. We were talking about Randall Rouser early in the program. I love Randall Rouser. Randall Rouser is a hard-bitten killer. He's a great guy, and I think I understand him, but he also loves the game.
Yes.
And he is soldier trained, and he's on the side making the case for Christianity and religion. You need people like me who can face people like Randall.
Right.
And when we relax, when we get too comfortable and thinking that, we've got social evolution going our way, Donald Trump pops up. Mm. This is how we get Trump, right? This is how it happens. This is why we need social warriors to continue, because we are still at war. And you can see the stakes. We've lost some battles recently, and you can see what those losses look like. And so, yeah, it's got to be fought as hard on our side as it is on their side. And we need people of conscience and who have the talent and the empty place in their chest where their heart used to be to step up and become warrior trained. And I can tell you, every homosexual in this country, which I feel a great burden for, I'm not homosexual myself. I could have been, save for a few genes, could have been. So I have other reasons for having a real burden for that group. They've won some battles, but they can lose them. They can feel the bite of this culture war that we're in ways that people who are otherwise comfortable in this society maybe don't feel. Mm-hmm. And it is a war. And if it wasn't for people like myself or like Natalie Collins, say, in her campaign for egalitarianism for women, and people who stepped up there and who have their voices cut through the noise and be heard. If it wasn't for that, there would be no gay marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And we still have a situation where gay people who want to get married still can't get married in their homelands because, county clerks say, oh, no, right. I'm not going to do that. Yeah. And we have a government that's now friendly to that idea. Or, I would like to get a cake for my wedding. And no, you can't do that. And that's being upheld. We are still in the middle of a culture war. And if you think that we won it and that we can just be nice now, you're not seeing the whole picture of the culture. So, yeah, I look forward to the day when the lion can lie down with the deer and we all sing Kumbaya. But right now we're at war and I'm a lion. And if you're a deer on the other side, I am going to eat you up. And I am not going to feel sorry about it. And I'm going to hunt your family down and eat them up too. I am not sorry because I know what a person with a militant mindset who is a Christian can be like. And I know what kind of damage they can do because I was that person. I was that person. I was as smart and as talented and as fervent as I say that I was. I was more so. And the damage that I did on the other side keeps me up at night. Mm. And so I can do this for the rest of my life and still never pay my debt to the society that I helped destroy.
Mm. Okay.
I'm nowhere close to letting my foot off the gas.
Very well said. I hear what you're saying. And I do think that it is important.
The problem with that is also very real, though, because, ultimately, I don't want to just destroy Christianity. I'm not the destroyer of worlds. I would like to see a better, gentler Christianity. I would like to see some changes in religion. We're not going to stomp out religion in our lifetime. And during a time like this, where we're going through a worldwide pandemic and everything is on its ear, sometimes we need to come together and do things. And it's very hard for a person like me to bring people together to a cause because they only know me as the warrior. And so we need people like you. So I will tell you this, by the time you air this, I'll be hopefully almost done with the project. But at the time of this recording, I'm trying to put together a team of writers that include Christians as well as atheists to talk about our worldview and how it's holding up in the crisis. There's a theological component. Randall Rouser has agreed to take the Christian position and defend it as the better position to hold during the time of suffering. I'll be kind of debating him in this work and holding up the secular position. But the work is really not about the debate. That's just a part of what we do with SNS. And,
okay.
Like I said, Randall and I, we're different sides of the same coin in that sense. But it's really a series of essays that I want from both Christians and atheists to just talk about whatever they like as it relates to this current crisis, whether it's theological, philosophical, or just practical and utilitarian. Mm-hmm. My intent is to make that available for free, but also to put it on Amazon and sell it for $2.99 and raise $5,000, really all the funds, whatever that ends up being, and donate to the International Red Cross.
Okay.
For relief effort, because otherwise I don't have any money. I can't donate. But this is maybe one way I can make it. The reason I mention that, besides just a shameless plug, is that it is hard to bring Christians together with someone like me, because I am a lion, I am a warrior, I'm a soldier, and they know that. They might wonder, well, what are you going to get out of it? What's your real angle? That sort of thing.
Yeah.
And my real angle is sincere, but I am the wrong person for that message, if you will. And so we really need people like you out there doing it. Now, like I said, I'm not going to let the difficulty of that stop me from getting this done.
Yeah.
And so by the time your audience hears this, hopefully it's well underway. I know the crisis will still be well underway. And if anyone out there wants to join the project late, Skeptics and Seekers at gmail.com. Just send me an email and we can talk about that. So I just wanted to mention there's a downside. I recognize that. I am underneath all of this still very much a human being.
Yeah.
But I recognize that it makes it difficult for me to do anything but fight. And since I do this a lot, people don't trust me to do anything but fight. So I have to overcome that. But that doesn't mean that the fight isn't worthwhile.
Agreed. Absolutely agreed. I do want to give you just one more opportunity. You mentioned the email address, but just plug away anything that you want to plug. How can people get in touch with you? What of your work should they be looking for?
As soon as you are done with this podcast, direct your website to that's www.skepticsandseekers.squarespace.com. Start at the beginning and don't stop until you're done.
Excellent. David, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I can tell you that this was a unique experience. I really enjoyed your story and your perspective. I think it's really important. Thank you so much for being on the show.
And thank you so much. You were indeed a graceful atheist.
Final thoughts on the episode. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with David Johnson as much as I did. David is a compelling voice in the secular community. He has a strength of conviction and the intellectual rigor to back up that conviction. I was most touched, however, by his personal stories, the obvious difficulty of growing up as a pastor's kid, the burden of the secrets that he holds, the burden of being set apart, of being, quote unquote, better than everyone else, the burden of not showing when the doubts began. There are so many quotes from this episode. He asks, "Was I the real thing? Pathologically so." I love that. I think that conveys so much of how strongly many of us lived out our faith, even though now we are on the other side of deconversion. I really appreciated that he talked about how the little things were the big things, that in his denomination, not believing even what from an outsider's perspective might be a minor doctrinal point meant you were going to hell. And so when he began his deconstruction, just acknowledging that they were wrong on one area really let the house of cards fall apart. And I think that is a pretty common experience when, as soon as we allow ourselves to critically analyze some point of doctrine or some deeply held belief and recognize that it is in fact not true, a domino effect occurs. And in some ways, it's an effect that is difficult to stop. We begin to challenge everything in our lives and really seek hard answers. To quote David one more time in reference to instrumental accompaniment to music, I think we might be wrong about that. And that was hard for me. It was hard in a way that I am not going to be able to express. But for me, if we were wrong about the musical instruments, we were wrong about everything. He also describes the deconversion process as the end felt like death. It's sometimes important to remember how difficult this process is. If deconversion feels like death to you, I'm so sorry. I just want you to know that you are not alone, that there are many, many of us out there. Reach out and don't go through this process alone. I want to thank David for being on the podcast and for sharing his story with such brutal self-honesty. He was so incredibly self-reflective and honest about himself. It was a very powerful story, and I hope that you could relate to his story. I imagine many of you who are pastors' kids probably really felt deeply a connection with David. Please reach out to him and tell him what his story meant to you. I wanted to talk just briefly about my statement about the facade of gracefulness. I think it's really important. I've had a few conversations recently with people via email and on Zoom Hangouts, and I've come to realize that I need to be more careful in the way that I express this, that in no way am I saying that I have figured out this grace thing. It absolutely is about what I aspire to be. It is not natural. It is not something that I do well. I can talk about it all day long. It's something that inspires me. And yet, even for the people close to me, I have to work at expressing my love and care. I just want to make it super clear that all of my admonitions and preacher-style statements are mostly pointed at me. It really is a facade. I really am working to be better than myself. And based on some of these recent conversations, I want to make it very clear that you should never feel guilty for being angry or not being loving or feeling hurt or betrayed. All of those things are natural and normal. What I am talking about, what I am hopeful for, is a recovery process after deconversion, after the hurt feelings, after the bitterness, after the anger, of what comes next. And even if you're in the middle of the hard time, you can see on the horizon where to go next. Just to wrap up, the idea of secular grace is not to add another burden to you during your deconstruction, deconversion process. It is rather a hopeful sign for the future of what can be, of what we can hope for and attempt to attain. Apologies for sounding like a preacher here, but it's something that I feel so deeply, and I just need to share it with you. As always, my name is David, and I am trying to be the graceful atheist. Join me and be graceful human beings. Time for some footnotes. The song is a track called Waves by Micaiah Beats. Please check out her music. Links will be in the show notes. If you'd like to help support the podcast, here are the ways you can go about that. First, help promote it. The podcast's audience grows by word of mouth. If you found it useful or just entertaining, please pass it on to your friends and family. Post about it on social media so that others can find it. Please rate and review the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. This will help raise the visibility of our show. Join me on the podcast. Tell your story. Have you gone through a faith transition? You want to tell that to the world? Let me know and let's have you on. Do you know someone who needs to tell their story? Let them know. Do you have criticisms about atheism or humanism, but you're willing to have an honesty contest with me? Come on the show. If you have a book or a blog that you want to promote, I'd like to hear from you. Also, you can contribute technical support. If you are good at graphic design, sound engineering, or marketing, please let me know and I'll let you know how you can participate. And finally, financial support. There will be a link on the show notes to allow contributions which would help defray the cost of producing the show. If you want to get in touch with me, you can Google Graceful Atheist, or you can send email to gracefulatheist@gmail.com. You can tweet at me at gracefulatheist, or you can just check out my website at gracefulatheist.wordpress.com. Get in touch and let me know if you appreciate the podcast. Well, this has been the Graceful Atheist Podcast. My name is David, and I am trying to be the Graceful Atheist. Grab somebody you love and tell them how much they mean to you. This has been the Graceful Atheist Podcast.